morning. We are in Maseches Shviis, Perek Hey. We're up to Mishnah Ches, page 450 of the Mishnah Behira. Excuse me. The Mishnah is now going to continue on the subject we've been talking about, and that is the question of Lefnei Ivel or Site Michshol, thou shalt not put a stumbling block in front of the blind, which Chazal teaches means you shall not do something, assist someone in committing a sin. Lo sit Lefnei Iver, in front of a blind person, meaning blind, he's either unintentionally blind, he doesn't realize that what he's doing is an Aveira, or Chas v'Sholom, he knows it's an Aveira and he wants to do it intentionally. Don't put a stumbling block. Don't help him do the Aveira. We mentioned the flip side of that coin is something that Chazal call Mesayeya Yedei over Aveira, helping somebody do an Aveira. Are they the same thing? Are they different concepts? We mentioned that there's questions about that. We're not going to go into that topic. But what we've been dealing with the last few days is this idea of how Chazal confronted the Ovrei Aveira. The Ovrei Aveira basically fell into two groups, those who intentionally violated the Shemitah laws, and then there was a group of people who, quote unquote, were Amei Ha'aretz. They simply were not educated enough to understand all the complexities of the Shemitah law. And so they didn't observe the laws as they should. Chazal had to confront these issues, and we've seen numerous times now in the Mishnah where the Mishnah uses the word Ovrei Aveira, the sinners who don't keep Shemitah. So the last few days we've been learning about what kind of tools, what kind of implements can you sell to an Am Ha'aretz during Shemitah. We don't want to help him violate Shemitah. So, for example, you can't sell him a plow. Why would anybody want to buy a plow in the middle of Shemitah? You can't plow your field. So you can't sell a plow to an Am Ha'aretz because we suspect that he's going to use it for impermissible purposes, and we don't want to help him do that. On the other hand, if we know that someone's a Shayma Torah Mitzvahs, he's Shayma Shemitah, and he wants a plow, fine. So we can sell him a plow. Who knows what he wants to do with it? Maybe they're on sale. Whatever the case is, you can sell him a plow because we don't have to suspect that he's going to use it during Shemitah for improper purposes. However, the Ha'aretz, we don't sell him things that are clearly going to be used for improper purposes. However, things that have dual purposes, they can be used for permitted purposes and for prohibited purposes. Then we are allowed to sell it to even an Am Ha'aretz, and we assume he's going to use it for permitted purposes. So, for example, a sickle, a large sickle or a small sickle, you can sell it to Am Ha'aretz during Shemitah. We are allowed to presume he's going to use it to cut permissible things. We don't have to assume he's going to use it for impermissible things. And that's the Mishnah we learned, Perek Hey, Mishnah Vav on page 448. Then on page 449, Mishnah Zayin, we learned about how many jugs of oil, how many jugs of wine, in other words, empty jugs, how many empty jugs that would be used to store olive oil, and how many empty jugs of wine that would be used to store wine can you sell to an Am Ha'aretz, understanding that there's only so many grapes and so many olives that you can permissibly pick and squeeze at a time. If you sell him too many jugs, you may be helping him pick more than he's allowed to. We mentioned you're not allowed to really store a huge amount. What does a huge amount mean? We'll get to that when we get to the halacha portion. But when you pick payroll Shviis, you can pick for yourself. You can pick to have for your family. You can pick for a couple of days, but you can't go into the field and pick the whole pomegranate tree and bring your truck and take the pomegranates home so you'll have it for a couple of weeks or a couple of months. That's not permissible. So we need to be careful. Even storage items such as jugs. How many jugs, empty jugs, can you sell to an Am Ha'aretz during Shemitah? And that was Mishnah Zayin on page 449. Now we're up to page 450. Mishnah Ches. Beis Shammai omrim lo yimko lo porach oreshes b'shviis. Beis Shammai says you're not allowed to sell to an Am Ha'aretz a para, a bull, a cow that is trained in how to pull a plow. Not every bull or cow will pull a plow. They are generally stubborn animals, and in order to train them to pull the plow and do that difficult work takes time, and it is an investment. So Beis Shammai says a bull, a cow that's trained to pull a plow, you cannot sell to an Am Ha'aretz during Shemitah, because why would the Am Ha'aretz be willing to pay that extra price for the bull, cow that's trained to pull the plow? Because he wants to use it to pull a plow. And we're not going to help him pull a plow in a field during Shemitah. So Beis Shammai says you're not allowed to sell a bull or cow that's trained to pull a plow during Shemitah to an Amoritz. Beis Hillel matirin. Beis Hillel says, yes, you can sell the bull cow that's trained to pull the plow to an Amoritz during Shemitah. Why? Because perhaps he wants to use it to slaughter it for meat. Now, it is true that it is a bit unusual for a person to pay that extra money to get a bull cow that's trained to pull a plow and then to slaughter it for meat, because you don't have to buy the more expensive bull cow for meat. You can go into a market and buy a regular bull and cow for meat. Why would you pay the extra money for a bull cow that's been trained to pull the plow? Nevertheless, as we've learned before, and we're going to learn again today in this Mishnah, once I have a reason, a plausible, reasonable reason that Am Ha'aretz may want something, I don't have to suspect everything he's doing is in violation of the law. If something is clearly and uniquely used to violate the law, like a plow, the actual plow, I'm not going to sell him during Shemitah because he has no reason to need it except to plow the field. I'm not going to help the Am Ha'aretz violate Shemitah. But a dual purpose item, we just learned, you learned it last time, we reviewed it today, a dual purpose item, a sickle, you can sell it to the Am Ha'aretz because we can assume that he wants to use it for a permissible purpose. I don't have to be choshed. I don't have to suspect the Am Ha'aretz that everything he buys, he's buying it to violate Shemitah. So I can sell him, for example, the sickle. Here, Beis Hillel is telling me a little more of a chiddush, that even though this bull cow has been trained to pull a plow and is normally more expensive than the bull cow you would buy to shecht for meat, nevertheless, Beis Hillel says you can sell that bull cow that's been trained to pull the plow, you can sell it to Am Ha'aretz because I'm allowed to assume that he's not going to use it to plow, he's going to use it for shechting for meat. As long as I have some kind of plausible explanation for why the Am Ha'aretz wants it, I can sell it to him according to Beis Hillel. And here, although it's not 100%, and it may not even be 50%, but there is a chance that he's going to use it to shecht for meat, I can sell him the bull cow that's trained to pull the plow. That's Beis Hillel's lenient opinion. The Mishnah now continues, says, Mochel o peres, afilu b'shas hazera. Let's say you're an apple dealer, and during Shemitah, for example, 7th year, you have apples that are 6th-year apples. We've learned about that. They ripened, which I'm not saying ripened, they blossomed, chanata. They halachically blossomed in the 6th year, and you're picking them in the 7th year. Those are not Shemitah apples. Those are apples of the 6th year. So you have apples of the 6th year, and during the seeding time of the agricultural season in the 7th year, the Am Ha'aretz wants to buy some apples from you. Do I have to fear that the Am Ha'aretz is buying the apples for the seeds inside the apples because he wants to plant an apple tree during Shemitah, and therefore I shouldn't sell it to him? Mishnah says, no, I don't have to go to that length to suspect that the Am Ha'aretz wants to violate Shemitah. If he wants to buy an apple, he wants to eat it. I don't have to suspect he's buying an apple to plant it, to plant the seeds, even though it's planting season. Mochelo peres afil b'shas hazera. You can sell him fruits even during the planting season in Shemitah. Umashilo sa'aso. Sa'aso, if you take a look on page 451, picture 150, a sa'aso, a sa was, as we've used the word sa'a many times in the Masechta, it was a standardized measurement, something maybe we would, it's not equal, but the same way today we have a liter or a gallon or a pound. In the time of Chazal, we had a sa'ah as a standardized measurement. So in picture 150, they're showing you a vessel that's a sa'ah. This vessel, this sa'ah, was used to measure fruits or grains, specifically on the thrashing floor. So if you take a look at picture 150, you can see that the Am Ha'aretz on the left side has a pile of produce. And what this sa'ah was used for was, you would, let's say you had a large pile of produce, and you wanted to store some of it. People had silos because there was no refrigeration, etc. in those days. So what people would do is they would keep a certain amount of produce available for day-to-day use, and a certain amount of the produce they would put into a silo to store for later usage. And they had different ways that in the silo they would put certain kind of preservatives, sometimes salt. There were different things they put in there to preserve the produce. The sa'ah was used, for example, a person decided he wants 10 sa'ah of apple stored for the future. So he would take his sa'ah vessel, take out 10 such vessels worth of apple and put it into his silo. So it was a measuring cup that would be used many times to measure how much you want to store for later. In Shemitah, this can be a problem, because if an Am Ha'aretz comes to you and says, may I borrow your sa'ah, and this is an Am Ha'aretz who has what we call the goren, he has like a thrashing floor or a silo, so one can start suspecting that he wants my sa'ah vessel because he's going to measure produce that he picked during Shemitah, and he's going to store it for later use. And you're not supposed to store Shemitah fruit for later use. You pick enough to eat for yourself and your family, or you put it away for a couple of days, but you're not allowed to store it for long-term use. That's not what Shemitah fruit is for. Do I have to suspect that the Am Ha'aretz who's asking me for my sa'ah vessel is going to use it to measure produce so that he can store Shemitah produce in violation of halacha, and therefore I shouldn't give it to him? The Mishnah says no. Umashilosa also, and you can lend the Am Ha'aretz your sa'ah vessel, even though you know he has a thrashing floor, a silo, he has a place to store. You don't have to worry about such a thing. We can assume, as you look at picture 451 at the top, the reason why he may want your sa'ah vessel is to measure a certain amount of produce or grain to use right now. Why do I have to suspect Am Ha'aretz is going to use the vessel so that he can measure a certain amount to store for weeks from now? He wants to measure it for use right now. His wife said, I need a sa'ah of apples to make an apple pie. Can you get me a sa'ah of apple? So he goes into wherever he keeps his apples, and he measures a sa'ah of apples so his wife can make an apple cake, a Shemitah apple cake. Who said that he wants to use it for the storage purpose, which is impermissible? We don't have to go that far. Again, what is clearly going to be used for prohibited purposes, we don't help him. If we have a reason to say that he's going to use it for a permitted purpose, we are allowed to assume he's using it for permitted purposes. And now the Mishnah gives us another example. Uporet lomos. In picture 151, I'm not sure you exactly need the picture, but let's say we have an Am Ha'aretz who we know violates Shemitah. We know, unfortunately, he violates Shemitah. And he has workers in his field that are working the field during Shemitah, unfortunately. And he comes to you and he says, do you have change for a 200 shekel bill? So maybe he needs change for the 200 shekel bill. He says, can I have 450s? Oh, maybe he needs the 450s because he's going to pay his workers, and that's why he needs change. He needs 450s to pay his workers. Do I have to suspect that I'm helping him violate Shemitah by giving him change so that he can pay his workers? Why should I suspect that? Maybe he just needs change because he needs change. And the Mishnah says exactly that. Upared lamois, you can change big bills for small bills, even though you know that Amoritz has people working in his field, and perhaps he needs the change to pay the workers, and now you're helping him violate Shemitah. I don't have to assume that. Maybe he needs change because he wants to give tzedakah. The kulan, and in all these cases, befeirush, if it's clear, asurin, it's asur. So if the Amoritz comes to you and says, can you do me a favor? Can you change the 200 shekel bill into 450 so I have to pay my workers in the field? Obviously, then we know that he's violating Shemitah. We're not going to help him. Or if he says to you, can I borrow your sa'ah cup because I need to measure how many sa'ah of my Shemitah fruit I'm going to store for later use. We're not going to give him the sa'ah cup because he made it clear he's going to violate Shemitah. But if he doesn't make it clear and there's a purpose that we can think about, that we can permit, that we can think that he's going to use the sa'ah cup or the money for permissible purposes, or the bull cow to shech for permissible purposes according to Beis Hillel, we're allowed to give it to him. Mishnah Test, half of Mishnah Test deals with the same subject about lending out vessels during Shemitah, and the second part deals with a non-Shemitah law. Mishnah Test, bottom of page 450. Mash'eles isha lechaverta hachashuda al hashviis. One woman, we're talking about two women here, so we're not talking about necessarily working the fields. The women are not working the fields, they're not plowing. But one woman comes to another woman. One woman is chashud al hashviis. She's chashud, she's oivran shvius. She doesn't keep shvius, this woman. What doesn't she keep? So again, if you take a look at the bottom of the page, page 450 in the Rav, Tes, bold words, hachashuda al hashvius, lechol pei v'shvius acha habiur below biur. Again, we're coming to these rules of biur, and that's the reason we skipped several Mishnayos. We skipped Mishnah Beis, Gimel, Dalid, and Hay in this perek because they deal with biur, and we haven't learned the laws of biur, which will be later in the Masechta. But here we're going to stop for a moment just to understand a basic law about biur so we can understand this Mishnah. There comes a point in the year during Shemitah, it's a scheduled time. Pomegranates have their own time, oranges have their own time. So let's make believe that for pomegranates, the date is the 15th day of Tammuz. Okay, making up, it has nothing to do with the realistic halacha. Making up a rule. The 15th day of Tammuz is biur for pomegranates. So this year, make believe is not the 6th year. Make believe this year is the 7th year. Okay, and people have been picking pomegranates, Shemitah pomegranates. What does Shemitah pomegranate mean? Shemitah pomegranate again means one that halachically blossomed in Shemitah. So they blossomed in Shemitah. I'm not sure agriculturally this works out, but year masha, sometimes this manabir is much later, but for the simplicity of the idea, we're going to do it this way. The pomegranates halachically blossomed in this year, the 7th year. We're making believe this is the 7th year. They blossom. And people have come into my field and then they ripen, and people have come into my field and they're picking pomegranates. Gesundheit. They take them home. They're not storing them illegally. If you pick too many pomegranates, then that's illegal. You're not allowed to pick for storage. Okay. So a person picked pomegranates, and somehow he picked for, let's say, a week or 2 weeks, enough pomegranates. He picked a permissible amount of pomegranates. Comes 15 Tammuz, I'm making that up as the day of Biur. Biur means like Biur Chametz, except Biur Chametz means, we think about Biur Chametz means to destroy the Chametz, burn the Chametz. Biur, Pei Shviis is a machlokes what it means, and we're not going to get into that now. The point is, once 15 Tammuz comes, that hypothetical date, if you have any more pomegranates in your house that are Shviis pomegranates, you must take them out of your house and put them outside your house and make them hefker. And now anyone can come and take them, or you are permitted to retake them yourself according to most poskim. And this is Nagel wine, Shemitah wine. There's a point in time where Shemitah wine, Shemitah grapes, Shemitah pomegranates, you have to, if we're not talking about you didn't impermissibly store them, you permissibly store them. You pick 2 weeks, 3 weeks worth of pomegranates, and you pick them, let's say, a couple of weeks before the 15th day of Tammuz, a hypothetical Biur date for pomegranates. You picked them a month before, and you thought you'd be able to finish them, and you didn't finish them. And now it's the 15th day of Tammuz. You cannot keep them in your house any longer. You have to take them out of your house, make them hefker so that anybody can take it. And if no one takes it, you can take it back into your house. That's called the Zman Biur. Fruits, produce of Shemitah that a person was not mava'er from his house, he didn't take them out of his house and was mafker them, they are prohibited to be eaten. Okay, so this case now in Mishnah Tes is about a woman who doesn't keep Shemitah, meaning, as the Rav says, she doesn't keep the Zman Biur. So the 15th day of Tammuz comes, in a hypothetical case, and she doesn't put out the pomegranates outside her house. So the pomegranates that are in her house are forbidden to be eaten. Now, this woman who violates Shemitah knocks on your door on the 15th or 16th day of Tammuz, and she wants to borrow some vessels. And presumptively, she's going to be using these vessels on produce that is being held in her house in violation of the Biur rule. So now, by lending her these vessels, you're helping her violate Shemitah. Can you do that or not? So the Mishnah at the bottom of page 450 says, Masheches, get the exact English words for these vessels. Masheches isha lachaverta hachashuda ala Shviis. A woman may lend the following utensils to another woman who violates the laws of Shemitah, meaning she violates the Biur laws and she keeps those fruits, those pomegranates in her house after the Biur time, and therefore they are not allowed to be eaten, but you can still lend her nafa asifta, kavara asiv, vitanur, and an oven. Now, even though these things could be used for prohibited purposes, maybe she wants to bake the pomegranates that she's holding in violation of Shemitah in the oven. Now you're helping her. Maybe she wants to sieve, or she wants to sift something other than a pomegranate, something that she collected during Shemitah, whatever the case is, but these are implements that can be used after the Biur time for impermissible purposes. You're allowed to give her these things because, as you can see in picture 152, at the bottom of page 451, you can give her the napa, you can give her the, let's see, the napa is the sifter, you can give her the sifter, because perhaps she wants to use it bottom of page 451, page 152. She wants to count her money. She's making piles of coins in it. Is that the most logical reason that she would want the sifter? No. But as long as I can have some kind of plausible reason that she wants to use it, I don't have to worry and suspect that she's using it for an impermissible purpose. This is even a bigger chiddush, and we're going to see why we can do this in a moment. This is even a bigger chiddush. We're giving her a sieve or a sifter, which presumptively is going to be used to sift or sieve food after the biur. So it looks like I'm helping her violate Shemitah, but I don't have to think of that. She wants to use the sieve or the sifter. She wants to use the napa for counting money. If you look at page 452, ukivara, you can also lend her the sieve. What's she going to use the sieve for? I don't have to assume picture 153. I don't have to assume that she's using it to sieve prohibited produce. Maybe she lost some money in the sand, and she picked up all the sand, and she wants to sift through the sand to find her coins. Is it the most plausible reason? No. But I'm going to do it for reasons we'll see in a moment. I'm going to assume that she's using it to sift for coins. For Rechayim. Or she wants to borrow a millstone. What does that really tell me? She wants to press some fruits. She wants to press, in our hypothetical case, she wants to press some pomegranates after the biur date, which is a prohibited activity. Am I helping her? Well, maybe the reason, picture 154, maybe what she wants to do is she needs to press some dyes. We'll learn about dyes at another time, but there are plants that you can squeeze from which you can get colors, dyes. And maybe she wants to press these seeds into making a dye for coloring. I don't have to assume she's doing it to press grapes. I'm going to give her the millstone. I'm going to skip now the next 4 lines in the Mishnah, which has, at this point, nothing to do with Shviis. It's a whole separate rule that has to do with Maseches. I'm going to skip to page, we're going to come back to it. We're going to move to page 453 at the bottom of the line. Why am I permitted to give this woman these kind of things? A sifter, a sieve, an oven, a millstone, when the most logical reason is she's going to use it to violate Shemitah, and I'm not allowed to do that. Why am I coming up with this lumdisha, dreidel? Oh, you know why she wants the sieve and the sifter? Because she wants to be able to count coins. Or she wants to sift through the sand to find a coin. Or she's using the mill because she wants to make coloring. And I can give her the oven. Why can I give her my oven? Take a look at picture 155. Why can I give her? That's what in the time of Chazal was called an oven, a tanur. That's the way it was built. It's a whole sugya Masech the Shabbos, a tanur, a kirayim, but that's a tanur. She wants to cook the pomegranates, so I shouldn't be giving her my tanur. No, I can give her my tanur because perhaps what she wants to do is she has some flax and she wants to sew some clothing. And in order to, part of the process of flax is to heat it up so that it can be used as a material. So she probably wants to cook some flax in there. Why am I assuming these things? The most plausible reason is she's going to use the sieve and the sifter to use it for fruits or produce. She's going to press grapes or olives in the millstone, and she's going to cook the pomegranates in the tanur. Nevertheless, I can give her these things because in the sieve and the sifter, she's going to count money or sieve the sand to find coins. And she's going to make dyes in my millstone, and she's going to cook flax in the tanur. Why am I permitted to assume that this is what she's doing? It's not really logical. but we go to such great lengths to figure out, what are we trying to figure out? How can I give my neighbor a vessel? My neighbor knocks on my door during Shemitah, and she says, can I, the woman next door, who I know doesn't keep Shviis, and I know that in her house there's fruits that she's not allowed to have. It's after this man beer, and she knocks on my door, and she wants a sieve, a sifter, a millstone, my oven. And the most logical reason is because she's going to violate Shemitah, and I should say, I'm sorry, I can't give it to you. But no. I'm going to say all these lumdas, that the oven is to cook flax, and the millstone is to make dye, and the sieve and the sifter is to find coins or to count coins, and I'm allowed to do that and give it to her. Why am I allowed to assume these irrational reasons? So the last line on page 453 explains, all these rules were said for the following purpose, for the sake, page 454, for the sake of keeping peace. Instead of getting into an argument with your neighbor, or getting into an argument with the Am Ha'aretz and saying, no, I'm very sorry, I can't give you the oven, I can't give you the millstone, and I can't give you my seed, and I can't give you my sift. I'm sorry, you violate Shemitah. Instead of doing that, because these are only these things are only a chash, we're only worried that the person may be doing this. And in many cases, we're dealing with a rabbinic prohibition, not a biblical prohibition. So Chazal were lenient here. Why were they lenient? Mipnei darkei shalom. For the sake of keeping peace between people and between neighbors, you want the sifter. You're not going to say this to the neighbor, but in your mind, you're saying, I know that she has a very good chance she's going to use my sifter and my sieve and my oven and my millstone. She's going to use it for impermissible purpose. I'm conscious of that. But Chazal said I can give it to her because maybe she's going to use it for a permissible purpose, and to keep peace between neighbors and to keep peace between people, I'm going to lend it to her. This is a rule Chazal made. You would not have such a rule if it was biblically prohibited. This here we're talking about rabbinic prohibitions. And in this area, Chazal said that you are allowed to do it, Ibnei Darkei Shalom. Umachzikin, page 454, Yidei Nachri b'Shviis, Avolo lo Yidei Yisrael. This is halacha we learned several, perhaps a week or two ago. The Mishnah said the same thing, and the Mishnah is saying it again here, because we're on the subject of Darkei Shalom, keeping the peace. If you see a guy working the field during Shemitah in Eretz Yisrael, you're allowed to say, power to you, Yashikaya, wonderful, beautiful field, even though you're encouraging him to work the field, because he's not muchriyev to keep Hilchos Shemitah. As we said, that's a sugya in itself. Avolo Yidei Yisrael, but chas v'sholom, you're not allowed to say to a yid who's working the field, power to you. Just the opposite. Under proper circumstances, you should try to have a little talk with him and encourage him to keep Shemitahs. So we're not going to say power to you to a yid who's working his field in Eretz Yisrael during Shemitah. V'shoylim b'shloimim, and you can say hello to a guy, not only hello, but you can actually say shalom or salam, whatever, but you're going to say shalom. Shalom to the Israeli Arab who's in Eretz Yisrael. And shalom, the Gemara says, is Shmoi Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Shalom is one of God's names. We learned it out from a pasuk, but it's one of the names that you're allowed to utter. You're allowed to say shalom. You don't have to say shamom. You can say shalom, even though it's one of God's names. So we now have permission to say to a goy shalom. Why? So the Mishnah, page 454, and they darkei shalom, for the sake of keeping peace with the Gentile population. It's right before Purim, so we know when we should keep the peace, we keep the peace, and when we have to pick up a gun and get into a tank and get into an airplane and bomb, we understand we have to do that also. And the Purim story teaches us, Amod al Nafsham, the Jewish people stood up for themselves on Purim, on the 13th day, and on the 14th day, the 13th day for all of the Jewish people, on the 14th day for the Jews of Shushan, they fought the Goyim, and they killed, I don't remember the exact number, but it's over 70,000 Goyim were killed in those days in the different provinces of Ahasuerus's kingdom. So there is a concept of Darchei Shalom, which Jews are very sensitive to. All the paths of the Torah are meant to bring about worldwide peace. The Rambam that we've quoted many times at the end of Hilchas Chanukah says, the only purpose of Hashem giving us the Torah is so that the Jewish people can bring peace to the whole world. And the Rambam quotes this pasuk that we're familiar with, and that goes back to the Ramchal and the Das Tavunos, that the Rebbeinu Shalom gave us a job as a Jewish people. We're the light unto the nations. We are to perfect the perfectly imperfect world that God created so that we can become partners with Him. Become partners with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in creation itself. So this idea of Darchei Shalom is a very, very, very significant idea in halacha. Ad kedei kach, we see all these things in the Mishnah. A woman who we know violates Shemitah. We know she has fruits, produce in a house that's Shemitah fruit after the beer date, and you're not allowed to eat those fruits. But you can give her different kinds of equipment, a sieve, a sifter, a millstone, an oven, because she wants to cook flax in the oven, because she wants to count coins in the sieve and sifter, or because she wants to make dye on the millstone. Really? That's why she wants to do it? Yeah, I'm allowed to, in my mind, say that's what she wants to do, because I want to be able to lend her these things. Why? Darchei Shalom. I want to keep peace, and in this area we're dealing with rabbinic prohibitions and not biblical prohibitions. Chazal said we're going to be lenient here because so, B'linedo, we're going to come back to page 452, 453, the several lines we skipped in this Mishnah, which have nothing to do with Shemitah. It has to do with, can a woman who is a Shomer Torah mitzvahs bake with a woman who we assume is not keeping the laws of Meiser? We can assume that she's not taking off Meiser properly, and she invites you to her house to make challah. Can you bake challah with me? And this is a woman who, in her house, we can assume that the flour that she doesn't have meiser taken. Truma is a different subject, but we can assume that she's not taking meiser. We have such a suspicion she's not taking meiser. Can I help her? There's nothing to do with Shemitah. Anytime, can I help a woman bake, cook, when I know that in her house there's a big shaila if she takes off meiser? So it's a similar question about what can I do during Shemitah with a person who I can assume is not keeping Shemitah. A related subject is what can I do to help a woman bake and cook at any time when there's a suspicion she's not keeping the rules of Meiser, similar to the question of helping a woman who I know is not keeping the rules of Shemitah. So we'll come back to that, Bli Ned. And when we finish that Mishnah, there is a chart in the back, chart Vav, I believe, that goes through all the things that you can sell or buy or lend to an Am Ha'aretz or a woman who doesn't keep Shemitah, and those things that you can't sell or lend to such a person. There's a chart which will be very helpful so that we can review all these halachas. And there's a lot of these halachas that are negea l'maisa. People today, obviously from Jews, own hardware stores. And their hardware stores are obviously open during Shemitah. And a person who you know is not Shomer Torah mitzvahs comes in and wants to buy all kinds of gardening equipment. Are you allowed to sell gardening equipment to an Am Ha'aretz during Shemitah? And this is a real shaila. The hardware stores are open during Shemitah. Can you sell these things during Shemitah to an Am Ha'aretz? When we finish that subject, we then, if you take a look at page 454, we come to a very historical, exciting, it's all exciting, but this is especially exciting for us who live in Eretz Yisrael. This is a very famous perek in Maseches Shviis, perek Vav, chapter 6 in Maseches Shviis. It's called Shalosh Aratzos L'Shviis. Eretz Yisrael is broken into 3 countries for purposes of Hilchos Shemitah, and this becomes, we're going to have to go into some history, something called Olei Mitzrayim. Those who left Mitzrayim, their children actually, they're the first group of Jews that came into Eretz Yisrael. Then there's a second group of Jews that came into Eretz Yisrael, the Olei Bavel. After the 70 years of Golus Bavel, after the Purim miracle, Jews returned to Eretz Yisrael, but they didn't settle all of Eretz Yisrael when they came back into Eretz Yisrael after the Golus Bavel. They only settled certain parts. Certain parts they didn't go back to live in. And then, of course, there's the bigger question of biblical Eretz Yisrael, which is bigger than Eretz Yisrael that we've ever settled. That's the Eretz Yisrael that God promised to Avraham Avinu at the Bris Bein Absarim. At the Bris Bein Absarim, God promised Avraham Avinu that he would conquer, his descendants would conquer 10 nations, a massive piece of land which goes all the way up to the Euphrates, Ad HaNahor HaGadol Nahar Paras. That's what God promised us. Throughout Tanakh, we're always talking about the 7 nations. We never talk again about the 10. 3 of those nations are Ammon, Moab, and Edom. Ammon, Moab, and Edom, God said that we can only conquer when Mashiach comes for different reasons. Edom comes from Esav, Ammon and Moab come from Lot, and the Rebbeinu Shalom said those 3 nations can be conquered when Mashiach comes to Tzayna Hashem Mamish today. So therefore we have 3 biblical maps. One biblical map is the 10 nations that God promised to Avraham Avinu, and we never had 10. The most we had was 7. That's one set of boundaries. The second set of boundaries are the 7 nations and those areas that were conquered by the first Aliyah, which are those who came into Eretz Yisrael with Yoshua ben Nun. That's a second set of borders of Eretz Yisrael. And then when the Jews went into Golus Bavel, Golus Ashur, and then Golus Bavel, they came back after the Purim miracle and they resettled Eretz Yisrael, but they didn't settle all of Eretz Yisrael. The geographic boundaries of Yoshua ben Nun were not fully settled when they came back from Bavel. It was a much smaller area, and that's called the Aliyas Ezra, the settling of Eretz Yisrael through Ezra. And the big discussion in the Mishnah is going to be, if you take a look at page 454, you can see a map. 456, you can see a map. And this becomes the subject of where do you have to keep Shemitah today? And this becomes one of the most relevant questions for us today. What part of Eretz Yisrael has Shemitah and what part of Eretz Yisrael does not keep Shemitah? In other words, there are places that are inside the original biblical Eretz Yisrael, but because they were not resettled by Ezra, do they still have the sanctity? And this opens a completely complicated sugya. We will touch on the sugya about Kedusha Rishona Kitcha L'Shaita, L'Asad Lavoi, Oiloi. When Yoshua came into Eretz Yisrael and thereby sanctified the land with the Jewish people settling the land, Was that sanctification of Eretz Yisrael permanent even after the Jews went into exile? Or was that a sanctity that was halachically valid only while the Jews were there? And when they were exiled, the sanctity left. Sanctity is, we're talking about now, halachic sanctity, truma, meiser, shmita. The land itself has kedusha, whether Jews are there or not. It's God's chosen land, but we're not talking about the idea of the chosen land. We're talking about the halachically holy land, truma, meiser, shmita. So Eretz Yisrael at one time was settled by Yoshua ben Nun, a tremendous amount, a large amount of land, although not as big as promised Avraham Avinu. And Shemitah was kept in that whole area. The Jews were then exiled, 70 years Bavel. They came back with Ezra after the Purim miracle, and they settled Eretz Yisrael. And now they did not resettle the whole area that Yoshua ben Nun settled. What area has halachic sanctity when they came back? Only the areas that they settled, or even the areas that they didn't settle because the original sanctity of Yoshua ben Nun remained in place. There's a big machlokes about how we paskin, and that's the sugya we're about to go into here to him. There's a famous author. It's famous. His name is Rav Landi, Yehuda Landi. He's written many svarim, and he published this sefer. And the purpose of the sefer is just to help us learn Perek Vav in Shemitah, in Shviis. It has other uses, but the sefer is dedicated to all kinds of maps and different areas in Eretz Yisrael. Where is Shemitah kept today? Where is Shemitah not kept today? And for our purposes, if there's areas in what we call Eretz Yisrael that does not have halachic sanctity, we're not talking now God's sanctity, we're talking about halachic sanctity, it doesn't have halachic sanctity, then, for example, if area X inside Eretz Yisrael does not have Shemitah sanctity because it wasn't resettled by Ezra, and that's the sheet that you would go by. That means fruits and vegetables that grow. Let's use fruits. Fruits that grow in area X have no Shemitah sanctity, and therefore they can be brought into the Yerushalayim or areas where we know were resettled by Ezra. And you can eat those fruits. They have no Shemitah sanctity, even though they grew inside the borders of biblical Eretz Yisrael. But because Ezra did not resettle that area X, there's no halachic sanctity, and you can eat those fruits if you hold like that shita. There's a big machlokes about that, but this is going to be the vast nafkamina between the shitas, the vast difference between the shitas. So we're going to learn a lot about the borders of Eretz Yisrael in chapter 6, Bezrat Hashem.